I was jolted awake by a deafening explosion that shook the very walls of my bunker. The sound reverberated through the cold concrete, tearing through the darkness that enveloped me. My heart raced as I struggled to pull myself from the depths of unconsciousness. For a moment, I lay there, disoriented, trying to make sense of the chaos that had abruptly intruded upon my solitude. The explosion had ripped through the lab's energy conduit, sending a wave of sparks and debris cascading across the room. The hum of the server racks, which usually provided a steady, comforting background noise, was replaced by an alarming chorus of alarms and frantic beeping. The once dimly lit space was now bathed in the harsh, strobe-like illumination of emergency lights. I swung my legs over the edge of my cot, my feet hitting the cold metal floor with a sharp chill. The blast had blown out several of the monitors, leaving shattered glass and twisted metal strewn about. I grabbed my tactical flashlight from the workbench and flicked it on, casting a narrow beam of light that danced across the ruined equipment. My mind raced as I assessed the damage. The explosion had not only disrupted the power but had also damaged critical systems. My immediate concern was the security of my data. Everything I had worked for, all my plans and operations, could be at risk. I couldn't afford to lose any of it now. I pulled up my hood and activated my emergency protocol. The room's automated systems began to stabilize, and I watched as the backup power units kicked in, their soft whirring providing a small measure of relief. My eyes darted to the security feeds displayed on the surviving monitors. What I saw on the screens confirmed my worst fears: an intrusion. Red lights flashed on the feed, and the security footage showed masked figures moving through my facility with deliberate intent. Their presence was both chilling and maddening. I knew that if they had breached my defenses this easily, their aim was likely to do more than just cause a mess. They were after something specific. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I moved to my console, fingers flying over the keyboard. I initiated a full diagnostic check and began scanning for breaches. The intruders' sophisticated approach suggested they knew exactly what they were doing. They had to be professionals, perhaps hired by someone who had a personal vendetta against me. The data streams were cluttered with alerts of tampered files and corrupted systems. It was clear they were trying to sabotage my work, erase evidence, and potentially even frame me. I could almost feel their malice radiating through the wires. As the initial panic subsided, my mind sharpened with purpose. This attack was not just a random act of violence, it was a targeted strike, and it had to be answered. I had always known that my work would make enemies, but this was a direct assault, and it demanded a direct response. I moved swiftly, reconnecting damaged systems and rerouting power to essential functions. With every keystroke, I set up countermeasures and fired up defensive protocols. The lab's security systems were in disarray, but I would need to be quick and precise to reclaim control. The clock was ticking. My enemies were already inside, and they were likely working to erase every trace of my existence. But they had underestimated one thing: the ghost did not retreat from a fight. I had made a promise to myself and my sister's memory, and I would not let this breach go unpunished. The echoes of the explosion still reverberated through the bunker, a grim reminder that my sanctuary had been violated. As I prepared to track down the intruders and reclaim my domain, one thing was certain: I would not rest until I had exacted my revenge and restored the balance I had fought so hard to protect. The roar of the explosion had barely faded when the memories came flooding back, sharp and painful, like a wound reopened. I found myself lost in the past, unable to escape the haunting recollections that had become a part of my soul. It was late at night, and the city outside was a blur of neon lights and restless energy. But inside our modest apartment, a different kind of darkness prevailed. My sister, Emily, and I had settled into a rare moment of peace. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her school books scattered around her, and I was at my desk, the soft hum of my computer providing a calming background to our conversation. Emily was always full of dreams and aspirations, her youthful enthusiasm infectious. She had plans for the future, hopes of becoming a lawyer, to fighting for justice in a world that seemed to have so little of it. I admired her determination, even though I was deeply entrenched in my world of coding and digital espionage. That night, her eyes sparkled with excitement as she told me about a new scholarship opportunity she had just learned about. She was on the verge of achieving something great, and I couldn't have been prouder. Little did I know that this would be the last time I'd see her so full of life. The peace was shattered by a sudden, thunderous knock on the door. Before I could react, it burst open, and armed men stormed into the apartment. They wore masks, their faces hidden, their eyes cold and merciless. I recognized them immediately. Their insignia, and the tattoos on their arms, were symbols of the ruthless drug cartel that had been making waves in the underworld. Emily's scream pierced through the chaos as they grabbed her. I lunged forward, but one of them slammed me against the wall with brutal force. My vision blurred, and I could only watch helplessly as they dragged my sister away. The next few hours were a blur of anguish and despair. The police were slow to respond, and when they finally did, it was too late. Emily's body was found in an alley, discarded like trash. The authorities claimed it was a random act of violence, but I knew better. She had been targeted, caught in the crossfire of a brutal drug war that had nothing to do with her. That night, as I sat alone in the darkened apartment, the weight of loss and rage settled heavily on my shoulders. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let her death be in vain. I would find those responsible and make them pay. It was in those dark hours of mourning that I made a vow to myself. I would use my skills, not just as a hacker, but as a force for retribution, to dismantle the criminal networks that had taken Emily from me. The code that once served as a hobby would become a weapon. The quiet anonymity of my work would be transformed into a relentless pursuit of justice. I began to delve deeper into the dark web, tracking movements, intercepting communications, and gathering information. I used my expertise to exploit the vulnerabilities in their networks, steal their funds, and disrupt their operations. Each success was a small victory, a way to balance the scales of justice, even if only slightly. In those early days, my actions were driven by grief and anger, but they slowly evolved into a mission, a purpose. I became a ghost in the digital world, a shadow that haunted the corridors of crime. Every hacker skill I refined, every piece of data I retrieved, was a step toward avenging my sister and making sure no other family would suffer the same fate. Emily's memory became the beacon that guided me through the darkest corners of the cyber realm. Her dreams, her life, these were the forces that drove me forward. I was no longer just a hacker, I was the ghost, a symbol of vengeance and justice, fueled by the pain of loss and the desire to make the world a little bit safer. As the present day crashed back into my mind, the weight of the explosion and the threat it represented was clear. My enemies had attacked my sanctuary, but they had also awakened a purpose that had never faltered. I would not let them undermine everything I had built. The battle for justice was far from over, and I would fight with every ounce of strength I had, for Emily, and all the victims of the shadows. I had always been good at blending in, but this was different. Every morning, I donned the uniform of an ordinary warehouse worker. A simple blue jumpsuit and a name tag that read, Mike. The job was unremarkable, the tasks mundane, but it provided the perfect cover for someone like me. I was just another cog in the wheel, another faceless employee in a sea of anonymity. The warehouse was a sprawling labyrinth of metal shelves and towering stacks of inventory. It was a far cry from the high-tech sanctum of my bunker, but it served its purpose. The steady rhythm of forklifts moving crates and the distant hum of machinery provided a comforting backdrop to my double life. On the surface, I was Mike the loader, but beneath that facade, I was still the ghost, a digital avenger, a hacker with a relentless drive. I spent my days lifting heavy boxes, organizing shipments, and handling inventory with the same precision I applied to my cyber operations. I greeted my colleagues with a friendly nod and small talk, the kind that never strayed beyond the confines of work. They knew me as a quiet, diligent worker, someone who kept to himself. They had no idea that my evenings and nights were consumed by a different kind of labor, one that involved breaching secure networks, siphoning funds from criminal enterprises, and orchestrating digital sabotage. Each day ended with a routine. I would clock out, exchange pleasantries with the night shift supervisor, and head to my modest apartment. It was a small, nondescript place, nothing flashy, just a refuge from the world outside. Once inside, I'd change out of my work clothes. The transformation from Mike the loader to the ghost was almost ritualistic. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, I would move with purpose. My apartment, though humble, was equipped with the latest tech, a carefully hidden network of servers and encrypted terminals. Here, in this concealed domain, I became the ghost once more. I would slide into my ergonomic chair, adjust the dim lighting to avoid attracting attention, and immerse myself in the world of code and cyber warfare. It was during these hours that I conducted my most crucial operations. I would infiltrate the networks of drug cartels and organized crime syndicates, meticulously gathering intelligence, planting malware, and redirecting stolen funds into accounts that supported causes I believed in. Each keystroke, each command executed, was a step closer to avenging my sister and dismantling the criminal networks that thrived on suffering and exploitation. My cover as Mike was more than just a disguise, it was a shield. It allowed me to operate under the radar, avoid suspicion, and remain a ghost in the literal sense. The warehouse job was perfect for maintaining my anonymity. No one questioned my presence, no one knew what I was truly capable of. I was a ghost not just in the digital realm but in the eyes of those around me. But maintaining this dual life required constant vigilance. I had to ensure that nothing in my behavior or demeanor could betray my true identity. I had to be careful not to draw attention at work and to avoid any actions that might raise suspicion. Even the smallest slip could expose me, jeopardizing everything I had worked for. Despite the normalcy of my day job, there was always an undercurrent of tension. Each day brought new challenges, both at the warehouse and in the digital world. I had to navigate the delicate balance between blending in and staying one step ahead of those who sought to uncover my true self. As the hours ticked by and the night deepened, I could feel the weight of my mission pressing down on me. The stakes were high and the threats were ever present. But for now, I could find solace in the routine, the quiet hours in my apartment, the steady rhythm of my work, and the knowledge that my efforts were making a difference, one keystroke at a time. The world outside remained oblivious to the true nature of Mike. To them, I was just another warehouse worker, another face in the crowd. But beneath that facade, I was the ghost, relentless, determined, and ever watchful. And as long as I could maintain this delicate balance, I would continue my fight from the shadows, ever vigilant, ever committed. The warehouse was a place where routine reigned supreme. But even the most predictable environment could harbor unexpected changes. It was in these seemingly mundane moments that the undercurrents of tension began to reveal themselves. Linda, my wife, worked at the same warehouse, though in a different department. Her presence was a comforting constant in my life, a reminder of the normalcy I had worked so hard to create. Yet recently, I had noticed a shift in her demeanor, a subtle change that set my senses on high alert. It began with small things, lingering glances, whispered conversations, and a noticeable increase in the frequency of her meetings with James, the warehouse supervisor. James was a charismatic man, with an easy smile and a commanding presence. He was well respected among the staff, but there was something about him that made me uneasy. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but his interactions with Linda were starting to raise red flags. At first, I tried to dismiss my suspicions. Linda had always been friendly and professional, and James was merely her boss. Yet, as the days passed, the signs became harder to ignore. I observed them from a distance. James would stop by her desk more frequently, their conversations lingering longer than what was typical for work-related matters. Their laughter, once a rare sound in the office, had become a frequent accompaniment to their interactions. One evening, as I was finishing up my shift, I saw them standing close together by the loading dock. Their conversation seemed intense, their body language intimate. Linda's hand brushed against James's arm, and for a moment, their proximity was more personal than professional. I felt a pang of unease, a deep-seated feeling that something was not right. That night, back in my apartment, I found myself unable to concentrate on my usual tasks. My focus wavered, and the once familiar rhythm of my work felt disrupted. I had to acknowledge the growing suspicion that Linda and James were developing a connection that went beyond mere professionalism. The implications of this were unsettling. I began to scrutinize their interactions more closely. I hacked into the warehouse's internal communication system, a risky move, but one necessary to uncover the truth. What I found only deepened my concerns. Emails and messages between Linda and James revealed a level of familiarity that was troubling. They exchanged private jokes, shared personal anecdotes, and, most alarmingly, discussed financial matters that seemed out of place in a workplace setting. The turning point came when I intercepted a message about a planned meeting between Linda and James outside of work hours. The language was casual, but the context hinted at something more than just a business discussion. My gut told me that their relationship was evolving into something more sinister, something that could threaten everything I had worked for. I confronted Linda subtly, trying to gauge her reaction without revealing my concerns. I asked about her day and mentioned James in passing. Her responses were nonchalant, almost too rehearsed. She seemed unfazed by my questions, her smile just a bit too bright, her laughter a bit too loud. The more I observed, the more I realized that Linda was becoming increasingly distant. The warm, open conversations we once shared had dwindled, replaced by terse exchanges and evasive answers. The divide between us grew wider with each passing day, a silent rift that neither of us seemed willing to address. In the dead of night, I found myself replaying the scenes I had witnessed, trying to make sense of the growing chasm in our relationship. The juxtaposition of my double life with Linda's apparent closeness to James created a precarious balance. If my suspicions were correct, Linda's interest in James was more than just an innocent friendship. It could be part of a larger scheme, one that threatened to unravel the careful facade I had built. I had to tread carefully. The stakes were high, and the potential consequences of any misstep could be dire. As I delved deeper into the situation, I knew I needed more evidence before making any decisive moves. But one thing was certain, the delicate equilibrium of my life was shifting, and I had to remain vigilant to protect both my cover and the mission that had become my life's purpose. In the shadows of my hidden domain, I prepared for the next steps, knowing that uncovering the truth about Linda and James would be crucial to maintaining control and ensuring that my fight for justice did not falter. The glow of my computer screens was the only light in my dimly lit apartment, casting long shadows on the walls. I had just completed a routine check of the funds I had siphoned from the drug cartels, money that was supposed to be funneled into safe accounts, supporting causes that made a difference. But tonight, something was wrong. The figures on the screen didn't add up. Large sums of money had vanished, and the digital trail led to a dead end. I was immediately on high alert. The disappearing funds represented not only a significant blow to my operations but also a potential breach of my security. I ran a series of diagnostics and checks, combing through my encrypted files and tracing the movements of the stolen money. My heart pounded as the realization dawned: someone had accessed my accounts, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I started retracing the steps. The intrusion wasn't a random act of theft, it was targeted and precise. The data pointed to a sophisticated manipulation of my security systems, and that kind of access didn't come from just anyone. The more I delved into the logs, the clearer it became: the breach was internal, not external. A sudden thought struck me, linking the breach with recent events. I recalled the growing distance between Linda and me, her unusual behavior, and her secretive interactions with James. I needed to investigate further, and I needed to do it quickly before my entire operation was compromised. I accessed the warehouse's surveillance system, tapping into the feeds and searching for any sign of unusual activity. My screens flickered with footage from various angles within the warehouse. It wasn't long before I found something suspicious. Linda and James were meeting more frequently, their discussions often occurring in private, away from the prying eyes of their colleagues. With my suspicions confirmed, I decided to dig deeper. I set up a covert surveillance network, accessing Linda's and James's communications through their work and personal accounts. My skills as a hacker allowed me to bypass their security measures, giving me a window into their plans. The information I uncovered was unsettling. Linda and James had been coordinating a scheme to steal millions from the warehouse's financial accounts, using a series of manipulations and false transactions to cover their tracks. The plan was elaborate, one that involved falsified reports, secret meetings, and a carefully orchestrated cover-up. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Their scheme didn't stop at theft. Linda and James had also planned to frame me for the crime. They had compiled evidence suggesting that I was involved in the heist, hoping to divert suspicion away from themselves and onto me. It was a betrayal on a level one hadn't anticipated, and it cut deep. I watched through the surveillance feeds as Linda and James discussed their final moves. They were meticulously setting up their alibis, making sure that all traces of their involvement would be obscured by their fabricated evidence. The realization that Linda, my wife, was part of this plot was a bitter pill to swallow. My mind raced as I formulated a plan. I needed to act swiftly and decisively. The first step was to secure all remaining assets and ensure that no further funds could be tampered with. I initiated a series of countermeasures to protect the money that was still safe, rerouting it to an impenetrable account that only I could access. The next step was to confront Linda and James, but I had to be careful. They had covered their tracks well, and any misstep on my part could lead to my downfall. I decided to gather undeniable evidence of their scheme. Evidence that could be used to expose them and clear my name. As I prepared for the confrontation, I knew that this was more than just a battle for survival. It was a test of everything I had worked for, the mission to bring justice to those who deserved it, the protection of my own life and work, and the fight against the very betrayal that had threatened to unravel everything. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on me. I was not only dealing with an external threat but also confronting the painful reality of deception from someone I had trusted deeply. The game had changed, and now I had to navigate the treacherous waters of betrayal, deceit, and retribution with careful precision. In the shadows of my hidden domain, I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. The battle was far from over, and every move I made would determine the outcome of this high-stakes game. The night had become my domain of reckoning. With the evidence of Linda and James's treachery secured, I had transitioned from a reactive stance to one of calculated vengeance. My dual life as a hacker had reached a critical juncture, and now it was time to make my move. My first step was to launch a series of cyberattacks designed to disrupt the systems they were so carefully managing. I needed these attacks to appear as random, unavoidable glitches, something that would sow confusion and escalate tensions without immediately revealing my hand. Using my knowledge of their operations and the vulnerabilities I had exploited earlier, I initiated a series of well-timed attacks. I began with a series of targeted disruptions. The warehouse's inventory management system experienced inexplicable outages, data losses, erroneous stock levels, and sudden, inexplicable delays. Employees scrambled to fix the issues, their frustration mounting as they dealt with system crashes and false alarms. Next, I turned my attention to the financial systems. A series of phantom transactions appeared, showing large sums of money being transferred to non-existent accounts. The chaos was immediate. Auditors and financial managers were thrust into a whirlwind of confusion, struggling to reconcile discrepancies that seemed to defy explanation. Linda and James were directly implicated in these disruptions. Their previously impeccable records were suddenly under scrutiny. Their once trusted management of the warehouse's operations now seemed compromised, casting a shadow of suspicion over their every move. The impact was palpable. Meetings with senior management grew increasingly tense, with Linda and James on the defensive. The strain between them and their superiors was evident in their interactions, frayed tempers, whispered arguments, and a visible shift in their professional demeanor. As the pressure mounted, Linda and James began to feel the heat. Their once secure positions were now under threat, and their carefully constructed facade of competence was crumbling. They had anticipated some level of fallout but had not expected the scale of the attacks. It was clear that their carefully laid plans were unraveling, and they were scrambling to regain control. It wasn't long before Linda and James started to suspect that their situation was not as random as it seemed. They noticed patterns in the disruptions, recognizing that their systems were being targeted with a precision that hinted at insider knowledge. The realization that someone might be actively undermining them set off alarm bells. In response, Linda and James ramped up their security measures. They reinforced their digital defenses, implemented stricter access controls, and began scrutinizing their internal communications for any signs of infiltration. Surveillance cameras were adjusted, security protocols were reviewed, and they became increasingly cautious about their interactions. I observed their heightened vigilance with a mix of satisfaction and wariness. The added security measures meant that I had to be even more discreet and strategic. My cyberattacks needed to be subtle and sophisticated, avoiding detection while maximizing their impact. Despite their efforts to protect themselves, the tension was palpable. Linda and James became more paranoid, their interactions marked by an underlying anxiety. They were on edge, their every move scrutinized not only by their superiors but also by the looming threat that they couldn't fully identify. I continued my attacks, adjusting my strategies to stay ahead of their countermeasures. Each strike was calculated, designed to exploit their weaknesses and further destabilize their operations. My goal was not just to create chaos but to force them into a corner, making their eventual downfall inevitable. In the shadows, I prepared for the next phase of my plan. With every digital disruption, I was one step closer to exposing Linda and James for the traitors they were. The game of cat and mouse was intensifying, and I knew that the ultimate confrontation was drawing near. The stakes had never been higher. My actions were not only about revenge but also about preserving my mission and protecting my future. As the pressure mounted, I remained resolute, focused on dismantling the conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything I had built. The digital war one had waged was escalating, and each day brought new developments. With Linda and James under increasing pressure from the disruptions I had orchestrated, I knew it was time to escalate my efforts. The latest discovery provided the perfect ammunition for my counterattack. I had been sifting through a trove of intercepted communications and financial records when I stumbled upon another layer of their deception, more damning evidence of their scheme. This time, I had concrete proof of their plan to embezzle millions and frame me for the theft. Hidden among encrypted files and obscure email threads were explicit conversations detailing their tactics and their planned escape route. They had even created forged documents to manipulate the financial records further. The evidence was incriminating and irrefutable. I prepared a dossier containing all the critical details, transaction logs, email correspondence, and recorded meetings. With this evidence, I could not only expose their betrayal but also discredit them thoroughly. I decided to use the evidence strategically, aiming to maximize the impact while staying one step ahead of their defensive measures. I crafted a series of anonymous tips and leaks, ensuring that the incriminating information would be delivered to the right parties without revealing my involvement. The dossier was sent to the warehouse's top executives, compliance officers, and auditors. I made sure the evidence was presented in a way that highlighted the direct connection between Linda and James's actions and the financial discrepancies. The timing was crucial. I needed the executives to be faced with undeniable proof at a moment when their trust in Linda and James was already shaken. The response was swift and intense. The warehouse management launched an immediate internal investigation, focusing their scrutiny on Linda and James. The pressure on them increased exponentially, and their already strained relationship with their superiors deteriorated further. Amidst the chaos, Linda began to notice oddities at work. The disruptions, which she had previously brushed off as technical glitches, now seemed too targeted to be mere coincidences. She started connecting the dots, realizing that someone with inside knowledge was manipulating their systems. Her initial confusion turned to suspicion, and she began to investigate the anomalies herself. Linda's unease grew as she noticed that her attempts to trace the disruptions led to dead ends. Files were missing, logs were altered, and security measures seemed to be bypassed effortlessly. She began to question whether James was as trustworthy as she had believed. The realization that they might be facing an external threat created additional strain between them, further complicating their already tenuous situation. She started to scrutinize her interactions with James, wondering if he might have been involved in the internal breaches or if there was another player in the game. Her paranoia grew, and she began to implement more stringent security protocols, hoping to catch whoever was behind the attacks. Despite her growing suspicions, Linda remained focused on her plan. She and James continued their attempts to cover their tracks, but the increasing scrutiny from their superiors made their efforts increasingly difficult. The mounting pressure created a volatile environment, and their carefully crafted scheme started to unravel. From my vantage point, I watched the situation unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and vigilance. My counterattack had successfully intensified the pressure on Linda and James, forcing them into a defensive position. Their growing paranoia and the investigation into their activities were signs that my strategy was working. The stage was set for the final confrontation. With Linda and James on edge and their plans in disarray, I knew that the time was approaching when I would need to make my move. The ultimate goal was to bring their deceit to light and ensure that justice was served. As the digital chess game continued, I remained focused and calculated. The evidence was in my favor, and I was prepared to use it to expose the full extent of their betrayal. The battle was far from over, but with each step, I was closer to achieving the retribution and resolution I had been striving for. The tension in the warehouse had reached a boiling point. As Linda and James's scheme began to unravel, their previously unbreakable alliance started to show cracks. James, sensing that the heat was closing in, decided to shift the blame onto Linda, hoping to deflect suspicion from himself. It began subtly, small, deliberate actions designed to cast doubt on Linda's competence. He started publicly criticizing her handling of the financial systems, pointing out errors and failures that he had orchestrated himself. The mounting evidence against her was, in many cases, fabricated or exaggerated to fit James's narrative. Linda noticed the shift in James's behavior with growing alarm. The once close collaboration between them had soured into a blame game. Meetings that used to be filled with mutual scheming now turned into confrontations, with James accusing Linda of mishandling critical tasks and causing operational failures. At first, Linda tried to defend herself, but James's accusations were relentless and increasingly specific. Reports of discrepancies and system failures were used to paint her as the main culprit. The mounting pressure from both the investigation and James's manipulations began to take a toll on her. Linda's frustration turned to fear as she started to question whether James might betray her. She began to suspect that James had been working to undermine her all along, using her as a scapegoat to protect himself. The realization that her partner in crime might be plotting her downfall created a sense of desperation. One evening, as Linda pored over the financial records, trying to find some semblance of order in the chaos, she received an anonymous tip, one that hinted at a hidden agenda and provided evidence of James's manipulations. The message was clear: James had been orchestrating the disruptions and pointing the finger at her all along. Linda's anger and betrayal fueled her determination to protect herself. She started gathering evidence of James's deceit, hoping to use it as leverage in her fight to clear her name. The realization that she was caught in a web of deceit and betrayal only intensified her resolve to fight back. Meanwhile, I was preparing for the climax of my counterattack. With Linda and James's scheme in disarray and their mutual distrust escalating, I decided it was time to launch a decisive strike. I needed to create a crisis that would not only expose their wrongdoing but also disrupt their operations beyond repair. I initiated a sophisticated cyber attack designed to cripple the systems they relied on. It wasn't just about causing disruptions, it was about creating a financial crisis that would force their hand and expose the full extent of their scheme. The attack began with a series of coordinated breaches. I infiltrated their financial systems, planting malicious code that triggered a cascade of failures. Transactions were manipulated, accounts were frozen, and critical data was corrupted. The financial crisis unfolded in real time, sending shockwaves through the warehouse's operations. The systems went haywire, data was lost, financial reports were scrambled, and transactions were reversed. The once stable operations of Linda and James were now in complete disarray. The crisis forced an immediate halt to their financial activities and triggered an urgent response from senior management. Linda and James were thrust into the eye of the storm. The crisis exposed their vulnerability and highlighted their involvement in the ongoing disruptions. Their frantic attempts to salvage the situation only further implicated them, revealing the extent of their deceit and mismanagement. As the scale of the crisis became apparent, Linda and James's earlier attempts to deflect blame collapsed under the weight of the evidence. The financial disaster was too significant to ignore, and their roles in the scheme were laid bare for all to see. The culmination of my cyber attack had achieved its goal. The financial crisis not only exposed Linda and James but also forced them into a position where their deceit could no longer be denied. The stage was set for their ultimate downfall. As I watched the chaos unfold from the safety of my hidden domain, I knew that the confrontation was near. The battle was nearing its end, and the resolution of the conflict was within reach. With the crisis reaching its peak, I prepared for the final steps to ensure that justice would be served and that Linda and James's treachery would not go unpunished. In the shadow of the financial crisis, Linda and James were more desperate than ever. Their world had been turned upside down, and the mounting pressure from both their superiors and the ongoing investigation had left them scrambling for a way out. They needed to understand who was behind the cyber attacks that had devastated their plans, and they needed to act fast. Late one night, amidst the chaos, Linda and James arranged a clandestine meeting. They had managed to uncover a few hints about the identity of their mysterious adversary, the elusive figure known as the Ghost. Determined to confront the threat head-on, they selected a secluded location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes and potential eavesdroppers. I had been monitoring their movements closely, tracking their communications and piecing together their plans. As soon as I learned about their meeting, I knew that this was the perfect opportunity to make my final move. I needed to stay hidden while keeping a close watch on their discussion. The abandoned warehouse was eerily quiet as Linda and James arrived separately to avoid drawing attention. I used my surveillance equipment to monitor the meeting from a safe distance, setting up cameras and listening devices to capture every detail of their conversation. Linda and James met in the dimly lit interior of the warehouse, their faces etched with a mix of frustration and determination. Their conversation was a heated exchange of ideas and accusations, with Linda expressing her suspicions about James's role in the chaos and James trying to deflect blame. Despite their mutual distrust, they were united in their resolve to deal with me. James proposed a plan to eliminate the ghost. He suggested a coordinated effort to trace the source of the cyber attacks and neutralize the threat before it could cause further damage. Linda, though wary, agreed to the plan, knowing that their survival depended on resolving the situation swiftly. As they hashed out the details of their scheme, I gathered my resources and prepared for the final assault. The meeting was a critical opportunity to expose their wrongdoing once and for all. I needed to act quickly and decisively to ensure that their plans to eliminate me would backfire and lead to their ultimate downfall. While Linda and James continued their plotting, I launched a final, comprehensive cyber attack designed to unravel their operations and expose their crimes to the public. I accessed their remaining financial records, personal communications, and incriminating evidence, preparing a detailed dossier that would lay bare their entire scheme. The dossier was meticulously prepared, highlighting their embezzlement, fraud, and attempts to frame me. I ensured that the information was disseminated widely, targeting news outlets, regulatory agencies, and financial institutions. The goal was to create a storm of media coverage and public scrutiny that would force their arrest and dismantle their operation. Within hours, the news broke. The revelations about Linda and James's criminal activities spread rapidly, dominating headlines and social media feeds. The details of their financial misdeeds and fraudulent schemes were laid bare for all to see. Public outrage was swift, and authorities were pressured to take immediate action. As the story gained traction, law enforcement agencies launched an investigation into Linda and James. Their once secure positions were shattered, and their elaborate plan to blame me for their crimes was exposed as the desperate ruse it truly was. The fallout was immediate, arrests were made, and the full extent of their criminal activities came to light. Linda and James were brought to justice, their schemes dismantled, and their reputations irrevocably damaged. The once hidden manipulations and deceit were now public knowledge, and they faced the consequences of their actions. In the aftermath, I remained in the shadows, reflecting on the resolution of the conflict. The battle had been fierce, but my mission to expose the truth and secure justice had been successful. The delicate balance of my double life had shifted once more, and I prepared for the next chapter in my journey. As the dust settled and the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, I knew that my fight for justice was far from over. But for now, the victory was mine, and the ghost's latest challenge had been met with success. The world was different now. The storm I had weathered had left its mark, but the horizon offered a new beginning. Linda and James's downfall had been a turning point, a final act in a drama that had consumed so much of my life. As the dust settled, I found myself standing at a crossroads, facing the possibility of a future untethered from the shadows of my past. I had spent years living in the darkness, driven by vengeance and a desire to make things right. The battles fought, the lives disrupted, and the risks taken had been part of a larger mission to expose the truth and achieve justice. But now, as the echoes of the past faded, I felt a deep need to forge a new path, one that would allow me to move beyond the identity of the ghost and the burdens I carried. My decision was made with a mixture of relief and apprehension. I would leave behind the life of cyber retribution and seek something entirely different. It was time to step away from the virtual battlegrounds and the constant scrutiny, and to build a future grounded in purpose and personal growth. I began by severing my ties to the old world. I dismantled the intricate web of systems and technologies that had defined my existence as the ghost. The servers, the encrypted files, the carefully hidden tracks, all were erased, leaving no trace of the persona I had once embodied. It was a symbolic act, a way to cleanse my life of the remnants of my past actions. With my digital footprint erased, I relocated to a new city, far from the shadows of my previous life. The change was both exhilarating and daunting. The bustling streets and unfamiliar surroundings were a stark contrast to the controlled environment of my old existence. It was a fresh start, but it also came with its own set of challenges. I embraced my new beginning with a sense of cautious optimism. I sought out a new career, one that was grounded in the values of integrity and collaboration. My past skills were not discarded but repurposed. I found work in a field where my technical expertise could be used for constructive purposes, helping organizations safeguard their information rather than exploiting vulnerabilities. The transition wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt and the temptation to return to old habits. But each step forward, each day of moving towards something positive, reinforced my decision. I met new people, forged new relationships, and began to build a life that was not defined by my past conflicts but by my present choices. I also made a conscious effort to engage in activities that nurtured my well-being and sense of purpose. Volunteering for community projects, participating in local initiatives, and pursuing hobbies that brought me joy became integral parts of my new routine. These endeavors helped me reconnect with a sense of fulfillment that had been overshadowed by years of conflict. As time passed, the weight of my previous life became a distant memory, and I found solace in the knowledge that I had chosen a different path. My journey of redemption had begun, and with it came a sense of peace and clarity. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer dictated my future. In the quiet moments of reflection, I recognized that my fight for justice had not been in vain. The battle paved the way for a new chapter, one where I could embrace a life of purpose and growth. I was no longer a ghost but simply a person seeking to make amends and contribute positively to the world around me. As the new dawn broke over my life, I faced the future with hope and determination. The shadows of the past were behind me, and a new journey awaited. My path to redemption was just beginning, but with each step, I moved closer to a future defined by peace and new beginnings.